picture a country, no flag, no president, no army. But has 350 million people, more than the entire population of the United States of America. Now, this country exists, we just haven't been calling it one. The African diaspora, every African outside the continent, put them together and you have the third largest country in the world. Now, there is another diaspora, roughly the same size. No flag either, but this one has been operating like a country for decades, building networks, building power. Quietly, the Chinese diaspora, and they have a playbook, not motivation, a specific set of habits and strategies they carry from country to country, continent to continent, and it works every single time. Today, we open up that playbook and figure out what Africa and every other peoples around the world can copy. Let's look at some numbers, and I want to take the United States because that is where diaspora performance data is clearest. The median household income for Chinese Americans is $102,800 a year. That is according to Pew Research. The average income for Americans is $80,000. Black households, $55,000. That is almost half lesser than what the Chinese make on average. Same country, same laws, same economy, completely different results. And before anyone says discrimination, yes, it's real. Chinese immigrants have faced discrimination for over a century. Exclusion laws, racism, being told they don't belong. And yet, look at those numbers. So what are the Chinese people doing differently? That's the question, and the answer is not what most people expect. You see, the gap doesn't start at the job interview. It starts way before that. Chinese families make a very specific choice before their children reach university. It's not how much they study, it's what they study. According to Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology, more than half of Chinese graduate students in US universities are in STEM. We are talking about science, technology, engineering, math. A third of Chinese undergraduates too. You see, a computer science degree doesn't just give you a job. It puts you in rooms where the future gets decided. AI, semiconductors, biotech. These are the sectors that are going to control economic power for the next 50 years. Just compare yourself with someone who is studying English at the master's level, or you are studying history. What are you going to do with it except you want to teach someone else how to speak good English? You see, the Chinese diaspora has been placing its children in those rooms for decades. But the choice doesn't really start at the university. In China, surveys show most parents spend 13 to 18% of their annual income on after-school education, tutors, science clubs, math competition on top of school fees. 13 to 18% of their salary just for extra learning. So compare that to a regular student who just goes to school every day and does nothing after school. Chinese students put extra 18 hours per week. You can't possibly compete with someone who just studies during normal school hours. You can't. It's not about one child having higher IQ and the other one having lesser, but it's how often you train that brain to make the child produce what you want the child to produce. You see, the logic is simple. If your child scores at the top, they qualify for the best programs. And the best programs lead to the highest demand fields, and their earning ceiling in 20 years looks completely different. You see, that's not luck. That's a 20-year plan that starts before a child can even read. Now, hold that, because the next piece is going to make you see money completely differently. Here is what surprised me most. The Chinese diaspora and the African diaspora share the same financial tool, literally the same concept. A group pools money together. Every month, one person receives the whole pot. It rotates until everyone has their own turn. Chinese communities call it hui. African communities call it different names. In Nigeria, it's called ajo. In Cameroon, it's called tontine, onjangi. In South Africa, it's called stockvel. Different names, but exactly the same idea. Same tool, but completely different results. The Los Angeles Times documented how Chinese and Korean immigrants in Los Angeles used their loan clubs to open businesses, bakeries, grocery stores, small retail. You see, money went into something that will eventually grow. So for the Chinese and Koreans, one rule baked into their culture: that money had to build something. It has to grow. You don't receive the pot or the njangi or the tontine and throw a party. You don't buy a car you don't need. You build. African tontines, powerful. Millions of people survive because of them, especially where banks won't help. You see, that's real and really matters. Birth, and this is a very significant birth, research on African rotating saving groups consistently shows the money goes towards consumption, rent, ceremonies, household expenses. When most Africans receive janjangi or tontines, what do? They throw parties, they make birthdays and all that. You see, surviving and building are two different things. The other system, when we talked about the Chinese and the Koreans, their main law or rule that was baked into their culture was building something. You must build something when you take the pot. But when you come to African tontines, ceremonies. So it is just surviving. That's a very big difference. So imagine hundreds of tontines across the diaspora redirecting that money into businesses, into assets. You don't need a bank. You don't need a government program. You need one thing. This money builds something. One rule, that's the gap. But the money system is only one layer. There is an invisible structure beneath all of this. And that's what makes the whole model work across dozens of countries at the same time. You see, most people look at the Chinese diaspora and say they just work hard. They miss the invisible structure underneath. For centuries, Chinese migrant communities have built clan associations, chamber associations, community networks. When a new migrant arrives into a country, the Chinese community receives them, connects them to business networks, links them to resources back home. This happens in Manchester, in Lagos, in Singapore, in Sao Paulo. The same structure operating in dozens of countries simultaneously. You see, research in China perspectives even show that it has evolved further. Chinese local governments now actively support these diaspora organizations abroad, using them as bridges for trade, soft power, and long-term economic positioning. You see, the Chinese diaspora is not just hardworking individuals. It functions as part of a deliberate national strategy. That is completely different from communities sending remittances home and hoping for the best. You see, the African diaspora sends home tens of billions of dollars every single year. And that's more than all foreign aid in some years. Now, most of it goes into consumption, not investment. The money is real. Wealth building impact, far smaller than it should be. You see, someone told me of a Chinese man selling bread on the streets of Cameroon, just selling bread on a corner. One of the most basic, low-margin things you can do there. And people thought it was strange. Why come from China to sell bread in Cameroon? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what is he learning? He is learning where customers come from, what people buy when they don't have much money, which neighborhoods have traffic. He is buying market intelligence, and bread is just how he pays for it. You start small, you learn the market, reinvest, scale up. This pattern is documented across Chinese businesses in Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, Cameroon. The Chinese don't wait for perfect conditions. They enter at whatever level is available. Now, compare that to most common reasons Africans in the diaspora give for not starting a business. I don't have enough capital. I am waiting to save money. I don't want to start small. People will think that I am struggling. You see, the bread seller doesn't care about what it looks. He cares about where it leads. You see, there is one more thing Chinese migrants carry that you can't see or touch, but it might be more powerful than everything else. A belief that your results, not your family name, not your connections, are what move you forward. And when that belief travels with a migrant, it produces a specific behavior. Low expectation of being rescued by institutions, high willingness to start from scratch, No shame in doing whatever it takes. So the baseline is, I cannot wait for the system to fix itself. I have to build it my own way. You see, parts of the African diaspora haven't internalized that yet. The feeling that someone owes a debt, that the system has to change first. You see, that feeling is historically understandable. The debt is real, but you cannot wait for justice and build power at the same time. Those are two different conversations. And the communities building right now aren't waiting for the first one to finish. Now, one more thing. Chinese American families have significantly lower divorce rates and higher rates of two-parent households. Now, research is consistent. Stable two-parent homes produce better education outcomes and higher lifetime earning for children. You see, family structure is infrastructure, the same way roads are infrastructure. And the African diaspora has powerful communal family networks. The question is whether we are directing that strength towards building or just towards surviving. You see, none of this is magic. None of this requires a particular heritage. It is learnable, transferable, and parts can start today. Take the tontine or jangi or ajo. It already exists. The trust is already there. Just add one rule. This money builds something. Before you receive the pot, you should present a plan, a business plan. It can be a rental unit back home, a co-investment in a delivery fleet, whatever. In your tontines or ajo or Stockwell, you can decide we are not a consumption club, we are a capital club. You see, that one decision multiplied across hundreds of communities. Okay, in London, Atlanta, in Paris, moves more money into African hands than most donor programs ever will. On education, diaspora organizations that raise money for parties and funerals can start funding Saturday STEM programs, coding clubs, science competitions, scholarships tied to technology and engineering. Now, some communities are doing this already. It needs to become the expectation, not the exception. And African governments need to treat the diaspora like a strategic asset, not a cash machine. Chinese consulates map their diaspora, connect entrepreneurs to investors back home, link communities to trade networks. For most African embassies, people go there to renew their passports and leave. Ghana's year of return was a signal. Diaspora bonds are a beginning, but the full architecture of organized diaspora power is still being built. And it won't come from waiting, it will come from demanding it. You see, nobody handed the Chinese diaspora a strategy. In most countries, the doors were deliberately closed on them. What they built came from a decision, a collective general decision that populations without organization is just a number. You see, that talent without a system to direct it gets wasted. That money without a plan to multiply it disappears. 350 million Africans in the diaspora, the third largest country on earth. If we were one, the question is not whether that country has enough people. The question is what it decides to do with them. Aim at STEM before the salary exists. Turn the tontine into a capital club. Start the business even when the start is small. Refuse to let African governments treat the diaspora as a source of cash instead of a driver of transformation. You see, the playbook has been written in Chinese for over 200 years. It's time we wrote our own version. This is Africa Today. You're watching The Strategic Lens. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.